Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode, our guest is Anne Osborne with the National Wheat Foundation. Anne Osborne is the executive director of the National Wheat Foundation and has worked in North Dakota in agriculture for 30 years. Her experience includes crop protection sales, inside sales, and customer service with DuPont Company. She has also worked directly with growers on seed, fertilizer, crop inputs, and services in ag retail for 7 years, and has a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture education from Montana State University. Anne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron.
Well, we want to talk a little bit about the National Wheat Yield Contest, but before we get to that, we should tell our listeners about the National Wheat Foundation, kind of how it's related to the National Association of Wheat Growers, what it does for wheat farmers. Give us the update on the Wheat Growers Foundation.
Okay, thanks a lot. So the National Wheat Foundation, it does the things that you think of a foundation doing, strengthen and support. So what the National Wheat Foundation does is strengthen and support the wheat industry, and more specifically NAWG, the National Association of Wheat Growers. So NAWG is the sole member of the foundation, and they will help us select our 9-member board. But the foundation does things that are educational, research, and outreach in nature. So we try to make sure that our boards, the NAWG board and the foundation board, are educated, and also they get training on how to advocate for wheat growers. And then we work to educate congressional members and staff, and sometimes USDA employees. So just anywhere that the wheat industry needs that kind of work done. So we are a 501c3, which is a nonprofit. And so that's kind of what the foundation does. And we have a website that'll show you more about us at wheatfoundation.org.
And how is it funded?
We're funded by the long-term investments that we have. When they started this foundation years ago, the wheat growers got together and thought that they wanted to need a building in Washington, D.C., where NAWG could operate from. And so they owned a building. And then that building got to be used by NAWG and rented out and so on. But it was taking up a lot of people's time. And so they sold the building before COVID, when there was, invested that money in the stock market at a good time. So that money covers about 40%. Now, the other 60% of our budget is from our partners. So people that work with me on, like the National Wheat Yield Contest, that's our biggest project. So partners are helping us fund about 60% of our programs that we do.
Well, let's jump into the National Wheat Yield Contest. I know it's been a great program for several years now and continues to evolve, and we'll get into the details of it. But when did the program start?
This is 10 years. This is the 10th year. So 2016 was the first year of the contest.
How many entries do you have for the contest this year?
This year, 465.
Wow. Excellent. Is that a new high?
No, last year was over 500. So this is the second highest year, but last year we had 516. So this year we were down a little bit from that, but still pretty good and very happy with those numbers. What
are the goals of the yield contest? I know there are a couple of things that you're trying to accomplish. Number one, promoting wheat, obviously, but what are the other goals of the contest?
Yeah, so we really just want to improve the overall productivity and profitability and marketability of the U.S. crop. And then also this is educating and communicating to all segments of the wheat industry. Why is it so important that these growers are getting high yield, but not only high yield, high quality, and also profit? And then we want to be able to use the information that we collect to share these good best management practices, let's say, that the winners are doing to get the high yield and high profit. But that part about educating and communicating is really important. And you'll notice on our sponsor list is that we have all the segments of the wheat industry, from the seed and the millers, and we have people that are involved with the technology of wheat. So we're trying to make sure that everybody in the industry understands we really need to get both high yield and high quality to make sure that wheat is profitable for everyone along the way.
And we've talked many times on this podcast with different researchers and guests, and we know that is possible, getting high yield and high quality, and depending on the the classes of wheat that we grow in the United States. Of course, we've got 6 different classes of wheat. So what are the different categories that a wheat farmer can enter in the wheat yield contest?
So the contest, we split it down by spring and winter, and we have dryland and irrigated. And then we also have a new category that we're testing out last year and this year called the digital yield. And that's for the dryland growers that have technology such as scales on their grain carts and maybe John Deere offset or something like that. So they can submit their yields through their technology versus running the load to the elevator right that same day. So the digital yield category has been a pilot we're doing in winter wheat, central part of the country, and also in spring wheat.
So let's walk through the process. If I know we're kind of midstream in the wheat yield contest this year between when people have submitted entries and now you're waiting to collect that harvest data. Of course, we've got hard red winter wheat season harvest mostly wrapped up for the most part in spring wheat. So how does a farmer go about entering the contest and what are the processes?
They should plan now that they're going to enter. But the website, really, we don't open for new entries until after our winter's reception is Commodity Classic. So about March 1st is when they'll start putting their new entries in. If they're a contestant this year, they're going to be putting in their harvest data. So they would be putting in their harvest data anytime between now and October 1st. But if they're planning on entering the contest for 2026, which I hope they are, and that's why we're talking to you now, so that they're selecting varieties that are going to do what we're hoping they'll do, both high yield and high quality. And then they're just selecting those varieties and doing their regular thing. But come about March 1st, they would go into the wheatcontest.org website. And if they've never entered before, they just create an account. And then they create an account with their own email address and their own chosen password. And then they put their entries in. Now, some growers have trusted advisor, I call them. It might be their seed salesperson or their crop consultant or their ag retailer, somebody that helps them. And that's fine. They just have to share their username and password with that person, and then that person puts in their information for the contest.
Okay, so winter wheat growers are, at least here in Kansas, we're just a few weeks away from starting the planting process for the next year's crop. So what does a winter wheat grower need to be keeping in mind right now if they're thinking about entering the yield contest in 2026? So what are the factors they need to take into consideration? How big is the field? Or what are the requirements that they're going to have to do to make sure what they plant this fall is eligible to enter?
Good question. All right. So first of all, they need to purchase new seed. Every year we do new seed, and they would be doing that. And for the contest, the regular contest, irrigated or dryland winter wheat, we need a 5-acre piece. And then out of that, they're only going to harvest 1.5 acres. But for the digital yield component, if they want to do that category, they need at least 20 acres. They're just looking for a field that is going to run well for them. And then they're going to pick variety and buy new seed, a variety that will do both high yield and high quality.
Okay, so there aren't any varietal categories. It's just that you have to have that new seed, certified seed. There aren't any preferred varieties or anything like that.
And then they also need to be a member of Kansas Wheat.
Oh, yeah, good point. Good point there. So what is the motivation for entering the contest other than obviously demonstrating that you're a good farmer and you can maximize production and quality? What's the reward?
Well, the national winners get a trip to the Commodity Classic, and then we have, at the Classic, we have a winner's reception, and all those people get together, and they bring their families, and sometimes their seed salespeople and others that have helped them with the contest. So the winner's reception is a lot of fun, and they are mingling then with people from all over the country who've won the contest, and so there's a really good time, and they share ideas, and that's nice. But I think the most important thing that people get out of the contest is just that really mindfulness on we're going to try to maximize what we're doing on this. Let's try an extra thing or two on this particular field or this particular variety, and then they learn what works and what doesn't work for their own farm. So then the people that have entered the contest year after year, they're telling me that they get 20 bushel more wheat than they did before they entered the contest. So I think the most important thing about the contest is that. It's what they're learning to do on their own farm to maximize what they are getting.
So let's talk about the quality part of it. There always hasn't always been a quality component to the contest. It started out, I believe, just as yield, but adding this quality layer onto it, what does that mean? What exactly do you do?
Starting in 18, so the contest started in 16, so 2 years after the contest started, and they were always trying to figure out how are we going to add this quality piece. They started to do a sample of grain that every contestant had to mail in, and we got that grain tested for a Figus grade. It had to be 1 or 2 in order to be in the contest. And that was interesting, but it wasn't enough. As you know, that's just the grain quality. So our millers and our bakers said we would like to have this contest talk about more than just the grain quality. We want to see what is actually these varieties doing at this high yield level. What are they doing down the line? So that's when we added this baking and milling portion to the contest a couple of years ago. So now everybody saves a wheat sample, but the only ones that we bring in for testing all the way to the end use product is the national winners. But that's been really interesting because we do the hard wheats, we send them to GPAL in Kansas City, and then the soft wheats go out to Wheat Marketing Center in Portland. And the soft white is baked into a sponge cake, soft red into a sugar cookie, and the hard wheats are baked into a loaf of bread. It's the same protocols that U.S. Wheat uses for their quality testing. So that's been nice too to be able to use those same methods that they're using and get the information that shows that even at these high levels, these winners of these national yield contests at these high yield levels, they're still getting this good quality or industry desired quality.
That's excellent. And so you live up there in spring wheat country, but tell us a few things that maybe have surprised you over the years of doing this contest, regarding differences from winter wheat practices to spring wheat practices, some things that might shock some people.
Well, one of the things was funny because when the growers are putting their entries in and I'm looking them over and making sure everything's in there complete, I call people if I think that there's something missing. And one of the winners, and we do have a category, I should have mentioned this too, is that there's that percent over county. The dryland winners can also win not just based on yield, but also by percent increase over county. So Eastern Colorado had a winner in percent over county, and I called them to say, what was your crop protection? Because we take all that data so we can know what their production practices are. And so what herbicides did you use? Oh, I didn't spray for weeds. And I said, oh, okay. And I, hung up and I thought that's really odd. And so we, up here in spring wheat country, we would not get away with that really. So I'd called him. Then like the next week, I wrote it down on a different spreadsheet. I called him again. I said, I need to put your herbicides in here. What did you do for weed control? He says, I didn't have to spray for weeds. And I said, oh, geez, that is okay. I get it now. I mean, if it's a drier climate and they're, doing a good job with their crop rotations and so on, I guess that there really are a way to do it. And winter wheat is, of course, competitive. So I wasn't used to that at all. So that was kind of funny.
That's a different game that we play. Weeds typically don't come on till at harvest time. That's when the weed pressure comes on, or at least it has this year. Let's talk a little bit about the pilot program you said for digital yield. I think it's great that use the technology that we have available to us. So for traditional yield contest entries, it looks like it's the old thing. You harvest it, measure off a plot, weigh that plot, have an independent third-party observer. How does that different with the digital yield contest?
Digital yield, it is innovative. We're the first national contest to try this. And so we enter that by field. So they're going to, at the entry time, which is the deadline's May 15th for winter wheat growers. So on May 15th, they're going to know which of their wheat fields that they want to enter. So enter it by the field. And then, of course, we do want to capture what variety it is and so on. But we enter by field. And then they're going to show that field, giving me a copy of where that field is located. And then during harvest, they need to document a few things so that we know that what they're saying they got for yield is actually what they got for yield. So we're actually asking them to kind of document, did they calibrate their equipment and their scales? Show us that. And then we want, at the end, they're going to show us their whole field yield and then their selected 20-acre rectangular contiguous piece of that yield that they submit to the contest. And we thought about this for quite a while, and I had really good partners that helped us develop this category. So John Deere and Bushel and Westbred and others of our partners were present to say, how could we do this to make sure that it's got high integrity? And also, we want to take a bigger portion of the field, because I know that some people out there say, well, that wheat yield contest, you can just do an acre and a half in a sweet spot, and that doesn't really represent what's going on out in the field and so on. And so 20 acres of a field is going to be a little more representative and show that these growers, and I say the growers that are doing the acre and a half, they still are getting better yields on the whole field than probably most wheat growers. But the 20 acres on that whole field, that shows a little bit bigger sample size.
Can we talk about some Kansas winners in the past and maybe some of the data you've seen from Kansas? I know we had a challenging year a couple years ago. 2023 was a really difficult year here in Kansas statewide. We had kind of our lowest wheat production in over 70 years, but the last 2 years we've kind of climbed steadily out of that hole. So maybe give us some highlights from some of the Kansas winners in the past.
Yeah, in Kansas, we used to always have about 70 entries or so until the drought. And then now we're sort of getting, creeping back up to those. We get around 30 entries now. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that it'll be coming back, and those numbers will come back up from Kansas. But we have, like for example, in 2024, and those winners were actually in the Northeast. So you had a Winchester, Kansas winner.
Wow.
And Alex Knoll. And when I talked to him, I think this was his first year of growing wheat. So that's pretty interesting to be jumping right into the contest in your first year. And his history was that he had done the corn yield contest.
I see.
So I do get some people that cross over that do corn yield contest, and then they also decide to do the wheat contest. So that's kind of fun. Every year in the contest, Kansas has had generally 2 winners, except for the drought years. So we always have the 2 Kansas winners, one in winter wheat irrigated and winter wheat dryland. So the drought years was tough, and we didn't have any winners. But we always recognize state winners, 1 through 3, and then we recognize the national winners.
Well, I know we've had some harvest reports above 100 bushels again this year in Kansas, so it'd be interesting to see what some of those entries come up with.
I really think that there's going to be some national winners in Kansas again this year. I definitely hope so. And we have the digital yield category in the dryland too, so I think that there'll be that. We hope so.
We've got all this good information from these farmers who win the contest and do very well in the contest. So what is the best way for other farmers to learn from these winners? How is that information shared, or what's the best way to learn from their successes?
Well, that's a great question. And, something what we're doing right now is one of the ways. And the other thing we do is Progressive Farmer is the official publication of the yield contest. And so they do a really good job. We do some podcasts with them. We do the March issue is all about wheat. And so we have 8 or 10 pages in that March issue that are talking about the national winners, what they've done, and what their varieties are and stuff. So that's our starting place, is using Progressive Farmer to help us get the word out in the education, and then also just getting things like this, and Kansas Wheat, I know, does a great job with their communication. So we're trying to share those best practices as best we can. I did have a new website last year. So the way that the data is pulled is a lot different than it was in 2016. So we can look actually a little bit easier. And, like nationally, for example, I just ran some data the other day because, as you know, the Wheat Quality Council tours, one of the components of the formula is the row spacing. And so Brian Walker and I were talking about the row spacing up here in North Dakota, and we thought, have they changed really? There's some different equipment out here. What are growers doing for row spacing? So I pulled the contestants, 465 of them, to see what is their row spacing. And it's by far it's 7.5 and 10. Mm-hmm. Those are the 75% of the contestants fall into those 2 numbers. But you are seeing a little bit of a trend in certain parts of the country. Like in the Great Lakes region, there's starting to be more of a trend to go into like 5-inch rows.
Wow.
And so the the equipment that'll do that, and the yields that they're getting, we're seeing those are the higher yields in that part of the country. So we need to get the data that comes from the Great Plains, and the more growers enter, the better that data is. And then we can take a look at that and see what kind of things they're doing to get these higher yields and high quality.
Row spacing is one thing. Have you seen some wild differences in like seed population?
Not particularly on that one. Maybe I do need to take a look at that again by region. You know, and sometimes as a national, I'm thinking of it in national, and then when I went up there to the Great Lakes, they go, well, we don't really need the Kansas data. We want to know what's going on up here.
Yeah.
So I can do that for you. But I haven't done it just yet.
I often get asked, and what's the upside potential of wheat? And I sometimes throw out the number for let's just say hard red winter wheat in Kansas. I could say what should we be hoping in the next 10 to 20 years for yields? And I say, well, I think 150 bushels an acre. That seems reasonable. So, do you have a number in your mind? I mean, you've seen some pretty high numbers. What are the highest dryland yields that we've had historically in the yield contest?
Well, yeah, and then we go to the PNW. Mm-hmm. So you go to the Pacific Northwest, and that's where they're getting 170 and 100 dryland. So your number for Kansas is really, that would be terrific, right?
Yeah.
If we could say, we're going to routinely get between 90 and 130 bushel, right? That would be just great.
Yeah.
So as far as those eye-popping numbers, everybody asks too, like, who got over 200 bushel? We do get those. Those are irrigated normally in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
But I also want to say, we had a winter last year, North Dakota percent over county, that was 87 bushel.
Wow. So
we're winning, the growers that are in the contest. I don't just want it to be the ones that are going to be getting the 150 bushel in Kansas. I want it to be, everybody thinks that we have a chance to enter to win something in the contest, but we're also winning for ourselves because we're taking a look at our practices and making sure that we're maximizing our productivity where we are. So that percent over county category is pretty important.
Yeah, it's not just about beating the other guy. It's about improvement against yourself and your county, and just continually raising the bar.
Right. I think that's what we have to do. And then, as you know, because wheat is looked at like, do I need to plant wheat on my farm? Should I be doing something else or whatever? And we want to make sure that wheat stays on the farm for all of those reasons that we know, but it has to be profitable for the whole value chain too.
Well, Anne, is there anything else you want to tell us about the yield contest?
Just encourage everybody to try it. Give it a try if they haven't done it. Register on the website. It's not that hard. And then, plan ahead and pick those varieties that'll be high yield, high quality. See what you can do. And
the website is wheatcontest.org. I do want to ask you about some other programs that maybe the foundation is undertaking. I know you have some leadership groups, and tell us about some other activities through the foundation. Yeah, the leadership training is one of our big other projects, and Bayer is a great sponsor for that, and then Syngenta sponsors one. So we bring, people that are going to be on the boards of, not just national, but also even in Kansas or in your own state. Those folks are the ones that media wants to talk to when something happens. So those are the ones that are going back to the state capitol or going back to D.C. to talk to the legislators about what wheat growers and growers need. So we're doing education with them to make sure that they can tell the story and make sure that they understand what they're doing when they're going back and advocating for wheat and for agriculture. So that's the leadership program. So that's pretty exciting that we do that. And then we also do some things for congressional staff, educational opportunities. We have a farm tour in June during winter wheat harvest in Maryland, and we take some congressional staff and USDA employees out to the farm and show them the wheat harvest. And that's been a real big program for us that people really like to see that. And so they are learning firsthand, like what the programs that they're administering in their USDA job. Sometimes they don't always get a chance to see on the ground, how's this filter strip working, or how's this EQIP program that helped us build a chem shed working. So that's been fun. And then we do this reception, which is educational, in January during our winter meeting.
called Wheat 101. I think many of your growers and leaders have been to that, and that's been a pretty good event. So, and we're always looking, we want to try to, we have scholarships. We always want to look and see what are the educational needs, what are the newer things, what should we be doing and bringing forth to, first of all, our board and the NOG board, and then also the congressional staff and the USDA. So we're looking into what the needs are and what we should be educating on. So I listened to some of your podcasts who you've had on, like James DeMarchi with NAMA and Aaron Ballas, Green Food Foundation. And so some of that we need to continue to keep being educated about how wheat fits in there to the healthy diet.
Yeah, I think those are some of the emerging challenges of the MAHA movement and how wheat being a processed food. So there's never a lack of need for a foundation like the One National Wheat Foundation to address some of those concerns.
Yes.
Well, Anne, keep up the good work. Thanks for joining us and sharing information about the wheat yield contest. Again, if folks want to check out information on that, it's wheatcontest.org. And then what's the foundation website?
Wheatfoundation.org.
Wheatfoundation.org. So wheatfoundation.org and wheatcontest.org. Anne Osborne, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you to Anne Osborne with the National Wheat Foundation for being my guest on this episode. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future or have a question for one of our guests, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. You can find all previous episodes of Wheats on Your Mind at wheatsonyourmind.com or Apple or Spotify. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.